Thank you for downloading the book in the free electronic library royalib.ru, http://royalib.ru. All books by the author, http://royalib.ru/author/dgemal_orhan.html. The same book in other formats, http://royalib.ru/book/dgemal_voyana_our_unica_pioti_dunny.html. Enjoy reading. Orhan Jemal. Make peace, make peace, make peace. Chronicles of the 5-Day War. A month and a half after the end of the war. Moscow. Gradually, I even began to forget exactly how everything happened then. And about a month and a half after the war ended, a special forces officer from the Chechen battalion, Vostok, called me on my mobile phone. "You dropped by to us in Odinsovo, to the apartment to the battalion commander. We presented you for an award here, so take the medal." The medal was presented to me by the commander of the Vostok, Sulim Yamadayev. He probably presented such medals to everyone who was with him in Georgia. I knew that I had done nothing for which I should have received this award. That Sulim introduced me to the award of friendship sympathy, which often arises between people who find themselves together in a serious alteration. He probably felt that I was thinking that way. To hide my embarrassment, I joked, "If you are going to another war, call." I liked you. I got home and turned on the TV. They showed the awards in the Kremlin. Commander-in-Chief, a man with the face of an excellent student, hung the stars of heroes to some colonels unknown to me. The name of Yamadayev was not mentioned in the report. But in the first post-war days there was talk that he would be given a second hero. How else? After all, if not for the Vostok, the war certainly would not have been a 5-day war. My medal was in a plastic box. Red, blue, yellow, white moire ribbon. On the golden disc are snow-covered peaks and tanks crawling along the mountain road. On the back is the inscription, "For Enforcement of Peace." August 2008. Awesome wording. It sounds almost like a phrase from a police report: compulsion to have sexual intercourse. A yellow cardboard certificate is attached to the medal. On top is my name, on the bottom is the signature of the commander of the peacekeeping group in the zone of the Georgian-Ossetian conflict, Major General Murat Kulakmetov. Of course, I did not force anyone to any kind of peace, but simply nailed to the Vostok at the height of the Russian-Georgian war and, together with them, went from Tskinvali to Gori. I'm not even sure that I can be called a combatant. Chechens, yes. They participated, they shot, killed, took prisoner. And I was only present as a journalist and did not pull the trigger, but the shutter release of the camera. In addition, the results of this 5-day war are not unambiguous. By the evening of August 12, it became clear that Russia had completely won the military operation, but suffered a crushing defeat in the information battle. So, the guys from the Vostok battalion deserved awards anyway, but as for me, it's a big question. My publication, with the unpatriotic American title Newsweek and German authorized capital, was, in general, against my presence in the conflict zone. My boss, deputy, contacted me daily. Editor-in-chief Stepan Kravchenko, despite the war, Georgian roaming worked like clockwork. Stepan ultimatum demanded that I return. They called from Berlin. They were interested if there were any of our people in South Ossetia. After our photographer was blown up in Iraq a year ago, they make sure that the Newsweek people do not work in hot spots. So after all, South Ossetia was not on the hot dot list. They brought it in 2 hours after you left. So let's quickly go back to Moscow. All the following days, I shamelessly lied to him that I was trying to leave Tskinvali for Vladikavkaz, and now I even left, and now I'm already halfway, but the roads are clogged with military equipment going towards the meeting. That is, I'm coming back, only the return is going damn well slowly. In fact, I did indeed leave Tskinvali, but I did not move north to Russia, but south to Georgia. And he was not sitting in a Shigali ride, but on the armor of a captured BMP. The Chechens seized it from the Georgians. Styopa once again called me right after the battle in the Georgian border village of Semonikosi, and once again I cheerfully chattered that the hostilities, in fact, had ended long ago, and I had nothing left to do with Vladik. My voice was blocked by the cannonade, and Styopa heard this background. Instead of asking, "What are these sounds?" I heard a sad Well, you still have to be careful out there. Styopa understood that I was lying. The same officer who later called me about the medal then looked at me with curiosity. A stinky t-shirt that I had not taken off for a week, my face was covered in dirty stains, my elbows were torn to the blood from crawling like a plastuna. Fingers, convulsively squeezing the camera. Well, you have a job. And you? At least I have an automatic. I can shoot back. And how much do you get for it? Actually, I'm highly paid. 100,000 rubles a month minus 13% of income. But this is a salary, it runs up anyway, and specifically for Ossetia, nothing. Well, if the reprimand is not slapped, I would not climb here for such money. Yes, I'm not for grandmothers. The Chechen nodded understandingly, he is also not for money. I was willing to bet that my salary was higher than his. Why then? He liked the Georgians with whom he fought. He was very critical of the Ossetians whom he defended. And if someone seriously told him about his duty and about the fact that there is such a profession, to defend the motherland, then I think he would simply send him. This man was just a soldier and loved war. Yes, and I got involved with them because the war and I liked it. In general, my medal turned out to be something like a continuation of this conversation. They were presented not for feats, but for the fact that we were there together, and for about the same reasons. Although, of course, no one said it out loud. And as for the monstrous, for enforcement of peace, well, it was not in the power of the Vostokovites to name the medal decently. Say, for the Georgian campaign, on the eve of the war. Moscow. The war for South Ossetia began on the night of August 7th to 8th, and ended on the evening of the 12th. However, the fact that porridge is being brewed there has been clear since spring. Well, by the first days of August, everyone understood, the porridge is ready, it's time to serve. Right on August 1st, a series of mutual provocations began. First one side, then the other side fired at enemy positions with light weapons. On August 6th, my boss Styopa Kravenko asked, "Don't you want to fly to South Ossetia?" On that day, the head of South Ossetia, Eduard Kokoity, was indignant at the fact that the Georgian special forces had dug in at the so-called zero height. This height stuck out just above the Ossetian villages and, according to previous agreements, there should not be a post there. Kokoity ordered the local police to push the Georgians out from the height, and Styopa went to ask me if I would like to fly to Ossetia. The next day was spent in skirmishes between the Ossetian riot police and the Georgian military near the village of Nuli. There were first reports of destroyed armored vehicles. The leadership of South Ossetia cheerfully reported on the displacement of the Georgian special forces. Tbilisi denied this. The head of the analytical department of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Georgia, Shota Utiashvili, answered that Skinvali statements. This is a Georgian village and, of course, there are Georgian policemen who are not going to leave anywhere. On the morning of August 7th, Styopa was already in a hurry. Get accredited. Book tickets. But by the evening of that day, Mikhail Saakashvili declared that he did not support the use of force in resolving the South Ossetian problem. He gives the command to unilaterally cease fire and start negotiations. In Skinvali, this statement was commented unambiguously. Mishiko gave up the slack. Indeed, after all the previous saber-rattling, it looked almost like a capitulation. 13 o'clock. 23 o'clock. Penetrating into Chinval on the 8th was quite difficult. I sent a request for accreditation with the peacekeepers to the headquarters of the ground forces the day before. There was no war yet, there was increasing tension. The press service assured me that tomorrow the telegram would be read back in Skinvali, and with a clear conscience I called Kulakmetov's assistant for press relations, Vladimir Ivanov. He said that I would come one of these days and heard in response an encouraging, "We are waiting." I arrived in Vladikavkaz by noon the next day. The war was already in full swing. Ivanov's megaphone mobile phone was out of network coverage. The mobile phone of the head of the information department of the government of South Ossetia, Irina Gogloeva, was also unavailable. A call to Moscow to the press service of the headquarters of the ground forces gave a disappointing result. Your accreditation was signed, but we have no opportunity to inform Skinvali about it. There is no communication, and, in general, now we do not know where Ivanov, Kulakmetov and other peacekeeping officers are. There is not even information about whether they are alive. For the necessary information, I went to the headquarters of the 58th Army. At the checkpoint, I asked to be put in touch with the officer on duty. The lieutenant colonel, to whom I was taken, listened sympathetically to the story of my problems, said that they also did not know anything, that there was no way to help get to South Ossetia, advised an inexpensive but decent hotel where I could stay and wait for developments, and vigorously shook his hand in parting. I went back to the checkpoint, but at the very entrance I was caught up by a skinny officer of basketball height with captain's epaulets and the face of a smiling mare. "Can I have you for a minute?" "Come with me." "And who are you?" "Yes, I'm a political officer here," the smiling captain explained in a somewhat unmilitary way. "I understand, difficulties begin." He took me back to the duty officer, next to whom this time was another lieutenant colonel. His face was inexplicably both purple and pale. The chin, as expected, is stone. There was no point in asking who he was. This kind of facial expression is only found among special officers. Once again, but without any sympathy, he listened to my story about accreditation, about which they could not be reported from Moscow to Tskinvali, a request to help get to Ivanov and Kulakmetov, or at least give advice on where to look for them, twisted it in thick but dexterous the Russian Newsweek columnist ID on his fingers, and snarled with satisfaction. "And what, an American magazine, you mean?" And without waiting for an answer. "So, you are an American with us?" Tyak. All this did not bode well for me. Realizing that the Russian folk fun, Death to Spies, was about to begin, I chatted immodestly about the license of our magazine, registered with the Russian Ministry of Press, about the fact that Boldyrev, Commander-in-Chief of the Land Forces, personally signed my accreditation, and offered to immediately call Moscow headquarters on my mobile phone. The person came down. Call. Taking the phone from my hands, he spent a long time finding out who was talking to him, and then brought the Moscow interlocutor up to date. Here some Jemal from an American magazine is trying to find out the location and movement of our units. That means, as the request is translated into the army language, help find Kulakmetov. I always knew that a real military man looks at the world with different eyes than a civilian shpak, but I could not even imagine that to such an extent. It was clear that I was going to spend the next week, at best, somewhere in the garrison guardhouse. However, a benefactor unknown to me in Moscow cooled down the espionage mania of the special officer. Pressing the end call and returning my mobile phone, the lieutenant colonel changed his anger to mercy. "So they told me, you are accredited to the peacekeepers, and not to the 58th Army. Well, what am I talking about? And why did you come here? Maybe you can help me get to the peacekeepers?" "We don't have instructions to help you," the special officer concluded the conversation. "Get out of here." The horse-faced captain escorted me to the checkpoint and wished me success and all the best. The whole time we talked, he kept smiling like a fool. I pretended to be very upset and even a little offended that they did not want to help me. Although in fact it was clear, I jumped dry out of the water. Such conversations in wartime can end very badly, and the special officers simply let me go. I turned around and left. It became clear that I had to get to Tskinvali on my own. First night of the war. Tskinvali. Both sides appealed to the world community in style, and he was the first to start. On the very first day, Georgian leader Mikhail Saakashvili said, "Russia is waging war against us on our own territory. We are engaged in self-defense against a large and powerful neighbor. We are a nation under attack." 1990. Meanwhile, in the basements of houses that have turned into makeshift bomb shelters, at that time there were about 15,000 women, old people and children. The proud name of bomb shelters, these basements were completely undeserved. Basically, these were just pantries without any concrete floors. They protected well from fragments of the grads, which worked non-stop around the city, but could not withstand the hit of a howitzer shell and, moreover, an aerial bomb. A direct hit, and the basement becomes a large mass grave. The main victims among the civilian population of Tskinvali appeared on the first night during the bombing and shelling of Tskinvali. In each such basement pantry, frightened people sat to death, children sobbed, any newly appeared person was asked the same question. Are the Russians going to help? On the first night, no one knew the answer to it. Russian help in some incomprehensible way was linked to the number of losses. A day later, many retold the dialogue of a certain nameless Ossetian, hurrying from Vladikavkaz to Tskinvali with the same nameless tanker from the 58th Army. "Why are you standing on the road? What are you waiting for? Now you are needed there. Commands, forward, no. The authorities need a reason to invade. While there are few victims, there seems to be no reason to intervene. Edouard Cocoiti on the very first day of the war announced 1,000 dead. On the second day he was talking about 2,000. It is not clear how the president, who immediately fled from Skinvali to Java and had no normal contact with the besieged capital, could find out about the number of victims. In the first 2 days, and in the city itself, no one understood the scale of the losses, neither among the militias, nor among civilians. Kokoitov's figures were, of course, propaganda, but people actually died under the Georgian bombardment. Maybe there were dozens, maybe hundreds. By the morning of August 8, Skinvali looked like Stalingrad, as it used to be seen on newsreel footage from the Second World War. And at dawn, Georgian tanks went forward. First day of the war. Skinvali. On the night of August 7th to 8th, the Georgian army was brought into South Ossetia almost at full strength. The operation involved 4 infantry brigades, 1 artillery brigade, which was armed with 44 self-propelled howitzers, including heavy 203mm peonies, highly mobile Czech 152mm Dana, and powerful Soviet Acacia of the same caliber. 42 multiple rocket launchers, mainly BM-21 Grad. Several tank battalions with 200 modernized T-72 tanks. A number of special forces units trained in Iraq to fight the partisans. From the air, they were supported by 10 Su-25 attack aircraft, which were modernized by Israeli specialists. In Georgian military terminology, these improved aircraft were called Mimino. In addition to them, Georgian aviation had several combat helicopters. They were opposed by a much smaller force, which, in addition, was badly organized. There were units of peacekeepers around Skinvali, but the only combat-ready unit they had was a company of Chechen special forces seconded in the spring from the Vostok Battalion, which occupied positions on Mount Spider. There were also several hundred Ossetian militias and the Skinvali militia in the city. They had at their disposal about 80 obsolete T-72 tanks and about 100 artillery units, including mortars and Grad multiple rocket launchers. Theoretically, it was possible to try to organize a defense even with such forces. But the South Ossetian militias simply did not know how to use all this. Centralized command and control of troops, multi-channel communications, artillery and anti-tank reserves, they simply did not have any of this. Ossetians had no tools for combined arms combat at all. For the most part, military equipment was not in Skinvali, but in the rear Java. It was distributed among militia units, but the equipment remained unmanned and, as a rule, out of order. From the air, they were initially supported by Russian aviation. In the area of Oak Grove, outskirts of Skinvali, she even managed to bomb a column of Georgian tanks. However, after the Georgian air defenses shot down 2 Russian Su-25 attack aircraft, the defenders of Chinval were left without air support. The Russian command was cautious and did not want to lose aircraft. And the main units of the Russian 58th Army were at that moment completely outside the theater of operations. They stood behind the Roki Tunnel, the main road linking South Ossetia with Russia. All night the Georgian army was preparing to enter Skinvali. The assault was planned according to all the rules of military science. Over the past 5 years, it has been mastered with the help of American and Israeli advisors. Until morning, the city was under a non-stop barrage of fire. There was aviation and artillery preparation for a tank breakthrough. On the heights surrounding Skinvali and in the capital of South Ossetia itself, Ossetian firing positions, real and potentially possible, were suppressed. By noon on August 8, Georgian President Mikhail Saakashvili made a statement. Most of the territory of South Ossetia has been liberated and is under the control of the security forces of Georgia. Fighting is already going on in the center of Skinvali. 1992. And we don't have a mark about your entry. How did you even get to the territory of South Ossetia? Yes, you missed it. Without any verification. Why did they let you through all of a sudden? Maybe because I was in an FSB car. Very likely. We had instructions to let special vehicles through without red tape. Well, what are you nitpicking about now? Let's see your passport. Suddenly there is a Georgian visa? The already familiar game of death to spies began. I really had a Georgian visa. True, a month ago, the previous business trip was in Tbilisi. But in such a situation, hardly anyone would understand the details. Fortunately for me, the main talent of this FSB man was the ability to raise his eyebrows, theatrically depicting contemptuous bewilderment. More guy was not capable of anything. He rummaged through and inspected my entire backpack in detail, wrinkled his nose when dirty linen was taken out into the light of day, leafed through all the notebooks with a meaningful air, but could not find the international passport, which was in the pocket under the flap. During the 5 war days, I got used to something else. During these 5 days, no one has ever asked me for documents. In 5 days, I never once needed money. I'm used to the fact that you can stop helicopters, just go to any turntable with working blades. Where are you going? Don't toss. I'm used to war, you get used to good things quickly. And here I was met by an ordinary peaceful life. With all its charms, the passport regime and the omnipotence of the cops. The world doused me like a tub of rotten water. I finally understood the classic plot in my gut, a frontline soldier gritting his teeth. Oh, you rear rat! The Novaya Gazeta military commander Arkady Babchenko, who witnessed the scene at the checkpoint, grinned as he watched my face twisted with anger. I went through the first Chechen war as a simple soldier. We leave for Russia, I see a cop and shout, "Brother, how to get to the nearest tobacco stall?" And he told me, the brothers stayed there. And here I am to you, comrade senior sergeant. Understood? The border guard long and tediously asked me for the name of the person with whom I traveled to South Ossetia. Or at least the number of his car. I feared that my fellow traveler might be in trouble and refused to name him. In the end, the Chekists got tired of all this. They told me to get out. After losing several hours and several million nerve cells, I got the opportunity to go further. However, the ability to go is a clear exaggeration. It was 3 in the morning. The ride on which I arrived here, of course, rushed off to Vladikavkaz a long time ago. And who would wait until the arrogant FSB officer did all his tricks on me? And there were no other cars. I walked several kilometers along a mountain road and came across a stationary traffic police post. There I spent the rest of the night showing the cops on my laptop the war photos. They fed me and in the morning helped me to catch a car to Vladikavkaz. In my deep childhood, yard friends taught me all sorts of things useful in later life, smoking, cursing, and calling policemen rubbish. At that age, we did not talk about the KGB at all. Leaving the traffic cops, I firmly said to myself, I will definitely explain to my son that the Chekists are 100 times worse than garbage. Second night of the war. Tsar Bypass Road. And the man who so famously and without any checks brought me to the war was called Inal Bibilov. He is a doctor by profession. Born in Skinvali, but has been living and working in Vladikavkaz for a long time. He made his way to his small homeland in a special service car with an all-terrain vehicle, pass, which he shot from his border guard brother. At first, he was suspicious of me, who asked for it as a fellow traveler. What is the name of your magazine? How? Newsweek? And what kind of name is this? Are you an American? This was followed by my already familiar explanations about registration with the Ministry of Press and Accreditation, signed by General Boldyrev. He later admitted that at first he did not like me. Especially my Wahhabist beard. He was even going to hand me over to the border guards at the post near the tunnel. But by the time we got to the checkpoint, I recognized it as my own. On the way, Yanal said, "I'm not going to shoot anyone. I probably can't kill anyone at all. But as a doctor, I'm probably needed there." Further, however, it turned out that he was a pharmacologist. I advised the attending physicians which medicines are best to use. But, in which case, I can be an assistant during operations. Much later, I realized that not only a medical diploma drove him to the war. A week later we met in Vladikavkaz when I was returning to Moscow. You know, Inal said, my father lived all his life in Skinvali. We are 3 brothers, all have gone to different places. If I had not gone there, people would have said that when it was difficult, none of the Bibilovs were here. His battered 9 was, it seems, the only car that brazenly broke through that night to the burning Skinvali to the accompaniment of guns. When Inal appeared in the basement of a 5-story building on Tabalova Street where he was born and raised, the neighbors could not believe that this was even possible. During the first war with the Georgians at Gamsakerdia, I also distinguished myself, he said, beaming like a polished penny and marveling at his own desperation in hindsight. I was working in Tbilisi then, and suddenly Georgian criminals were released from all prisons, armed and sent to storm Tskinvali. They were considered kind of like volunteers, and then I got on the bus with them. Like a volunteer too. So with them I got to Tskinvali. And no one understood that I was Ossetian, because I speak Georgian very well. Inal laughed, remembering the adventures of 16 years ago, like a childish prank. Here I slowly lagged behind them and came to my home. At the time, no one could believe that I had succeeded. That my first Tskinvali night I had to sleep in a car parked in the courtyard of the house. There were no more places in the basement, and a tank shell hit Inal's apartment and it burned down. A couple of times we woke up from the sound of small fragments of the hail falling at the end of the fire on the roof of the FSB Shiguli, but we were both so tired and nervous that we didn't care. Second day of the war. Tskinvali. In addition to Inal, who broke through to Tskinvali to heal and save, that night, those whose task was to kill also made their way here. It was the Chechen Special Forces from the Vostok Battalion, which on the night of August 8 to 9 transferred its main forces to the vicinity of Tskinvali. They secretly passed without any road along the bottom of the valley, through uncultivated fields. They left a chain of Ossetian villages to their right, and Georgian ones to their left. All the next day the battalion fought hard battles in the vicinity of the city. The Chechens tried to unblock the approaches so that the main units of the 58th Army could finally enter the South Ossetian capital. All this time, rumors were circulating around the city that the Chechens were suffering huge losses. Although in fact for all 5 war days they had only 3 wounded. To help the militias defending Tskinvali, the Chechens detached only 1 company, Vaidenskaya. Oddly enough, that was enough. The company was commanded by Zordin Muradov, better known by his call sign, Cuba. Calm and even intelligent, Cuba, in the past he was a school teacher. Its fighters turned out to be the first representatives of the Russian army to break into the capital of South Ossetia. Prior to this, the city was held exclusively by the militias. Cuba entered the city from the north, just at the moment when Georgian tanks entered from the south. The second attempt to take the city began. At the time of the appearance of the Vaidenskaya company on the streets of Chingval, which became the front line, there were no more than 1,500 Ossetian militias. Artillery began to work with renewed vigor from the surrounding heights around the city. She had nothing to oppose. From somewhere in the region of the peacekeeping headquarters, the only captured tank, captured by the Ossetians the day before, snapped back. From the mountains, they stubbornly tried to cover it with multiple launch rocket launchers. This duel lasted for 2 hours, then the tank fell silent, and after another 40 minutes the Georgian military began to enter the city. Another fight in the streets. The Ossetians, thoroughly battered the day before, fled from the Georgians and ran into the Chechens going to meet. Where are you going? Go to certain death. They have such sniper rifles there, they hit for 1.5 kilometers. At first, Cuba only joked gloomily. Rifles you say? This is good. We would like these. Let's go and pick them up from the Georgians. The Chechens moved on and met new groups of fleeing militias. Where are you going? Go to certain death. Everything was repeated with slight variations. Once again, the usually phlegmatic Cuba could not stand it. Bitch. He pulled at the collar of the militia. Run, run. We don't bother you. But my fighters have nothing to squat on their ears. One more of you will blurt out to me about certain death, I will shoot him on the spot for alarmism. The bolt of his kalash clanged menacingly. Usually, Cuba is peaceful, even too much for a Chechen. But this time he attacked the Ossetian militias so savagely that it seemed that he would really put someone up against the wall. And what? His comrades told me later. He can. It is still quiet, he is calm, but in battle, oh, fierce. Cuba, in the battalion, was respected precisely for the ability to always be adequate to the situation. In the Chechen manner, this respect is expressed by the click of the tongue and the phrase. Eee. Cuba is beautiful. The Vaidenskaya company passed through the whole of Tskinvali and went out to the Georgians, who were trying to stop only a few dozen militias who had not fled. It was they who this time knocked out the first Georgian tank in the area of the 12th school. Grenade launcher Suzlan, crawling away from the point where he fired the shot, swearing gloomily. You can't take it with one hit. Oh, if we had a pencil. A pencil is a special double grenade. The first charge undermines the active tank armor, and the second, cumulative, following it, already burns through the carrier armor and leaves no chance for the tank to escape. The tank, wounded by Suzlan, with a broken transmission, lost its course, stopped in the middle of the street and hollowed out from a cannon and a machine gun in any place where it noticed movement. Suzlan, covered by a machine gunner and a sniper, maneuvered around, trying to find a position for a second shot. The terrible quadrille went on for a long time, a very long time, maybe about an hour. Couldn't get close. Suzlan kept looking for a position for the second shot. The tank turned its turret and did not let it get closer. The Georgians could not leave the immobilized tank. It was not for nothing that a guy with an SVDSKA was with Suzlan. He sprawled in the courtyard of the house, behind a stone fence and through the gap left by the shell and aimed, cutting off the escape route for the crew. The hatch opened and a bullet immediately clicked on the armor. A cannon was fired into the breach, but the sniper managed to run across to another position. The question was not whether the Georgians trapped inside would survive or not, but simply how long they would last. The tanker probably understood that he was alive as long as he had shells and he could drive Suzlan away. But sooner or later the shells will run out. Each new shot brought the end closer. The tanker still fired. And what was he to do? Suzlan did not stop for a second, looking for a position for a new shot. The machine gunner who covered him was soon covered by another volley from a cannon. The upper half of his body, in a grey-green sweatshirt, was sprawled out on the sidewalk. There is bewilderment on the face, a bloody mess below the waist. Suzlan crept through the yards, trying to approach the tank from the side. In the end, the tank fired its ammunition and fell silent. Then I often tried to imagine with what feeling the Georgian tanker pressed the trigger, knowing that this was his last shot. Bang bang. There were no more shells. And at that moment, the tank was hit for the second time from a grenade launcher. Suzlan won this duel. As a winner, he showed nobility. He ordered to put up a sentry so that the Ossetians would not mock the corpses of Georgian tankers and infantrymen accompanying the tank. I approached the battlefield together with an Ossetian woman dressed in a flannel robe and worn-out slippers. On the way, she told me that her house had burned down and she had nothing left. I even borrowed slippers from a neighbor. The street was all flooded with water flowing from a bombed-out pump, and the slippers were soaked through. Coming up with the dead Georgian tanker, she rushed to kick him. The woman was stopped. They are still soldiers, even though they are Georgians. The Georgian was lying on his back, on the bank of a giant puddle. His open eyes looked into the Caucasian sky. In those dead eyes, a shard of life still seemed to be stuck. Not far from this place, the Chechen special forces were no less successful in dealing with another Georgian tank and infantry fighting vehicle. It was not easy for them to coordinate with the militias. The interaction between professionals and amateurs sometimes looked even comical. From talks on the radio. Choking with excitement voice. 501st calls Strelka. 501st calls Strelka. Absolutely calm and even phlegmatic voice. I'm shooter, over, shooter. Do you hear? There are Georgian tanks at the crossing. A lot of. Something needs to be hit on them. 501st, I understand correctly that you need artillery support. Yes. 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 Okay, let's get the coordinates. What are the coordinates? Well, tanks. 1994. 72. 8. 9. 9610. 762. 10, Georgian Times. Newsweek. 10 to 20. 15. 10. 8, 10. 20. Newsweek. Yes, I know, I killed them. Translate to the American that it was I who wounded him. I translated, the American looked at him for a long time and said, good shot. The Ossetian laughed, then said that he was taking the car in which we arrived, she is now mine. I did not protest. A little later, I got into a conversation with my bedmate. He turned out to be a friendly Chinvalian of about 30 years old. His name was Igor. He was wounded in the leg, but the wound was trifling, and he said that in the morning he would go to his own. Igor told me all the news and rumors that went at Skinvalley. I found out that it turns out that Arabs, blacks and Chinese fought in the Georgian army, but the most interesting thing is that Ukraine sent 200 female snipers, former athletes, to South Ossetia. I asked about the sources of information. Yes, what do the guys say? Answered Igor. At the same moment, one of the young doctors with a beaming face ran into our ward. The Russians are already in Skinvalley, he said. I learned that the 58th Army was already on the outskirts of the city. Realizing that I did not really share his enthusiasm, the doctor quickly left. Thus ended on August 9th, the second of our stay in the uncovered region. The morning of August 10th brought some clarity to the situation. The de facto Minister of Health of South Ossetia met with us and promised that the American and I would definitely be taken to Vladikavkaz, since the road through the Roki Pass was practically under the control of the Russian army. In the afternoon, the evacuation began. There were not enough places and we were not taken away. The hospital was practically empty. Only the American and I and the Ossetian militiaman wounded in the back remained in our ward, looking angrily in our direction. Nobody knew there would be a second wave of evacuations. With nothing to do, I wandered around the dilapidated offices, examining the huge holes in the walls. My trip was interrupted in the courtyard of the hospital where I came under fire. The shells exploded so close that the ground left under my feet. Having reached the bunk, I decided to wait a little with a little walk. Hey, do you have a knife? No. Do you want to eat? Do you have food? Yes, condensed milk. Nothing else? Not. I collected the leftovers of our food, which was distributed to us by visiting women. There was some boiled potatoes, bread, cheese and chocolate. For some reason, there was a lot of chocolate in Skinvalley. Having collected food on a napkin, I took everything to a soldier who looked at me with an incredibly surprised face. Come on, eat. How old are you? Thank you, I'm 19. Are you really from Tbilisi? Not at all. Yes, from Tbilisi. I turned away and walked away, expecting another stream of curses against Georgia and the Georgian government, which I had already become accustomed to in 2 days. Stop, wait, take condensed milk, eat, the guy said, holding out a jar to me. After a couple of hours, the convoy nevertheless arrived. The American was injected with some kind of drug. His pain became unbearable and the doctors were afraid that he would die faster from pain shock than from gangrene. Ambulances were taking us to the north, through the destroyed Skinvalley. The entire route on the road to Vladikavkaz was filled with Russian equipment and soldiers. I realized that the war had already ended, but I did not know that in just a few hours these tanks would cross the administrative border of South Ossetia and occupy 30% of Georgia. On the way, near the village of Dija, our ambulance was stopped. They are here, I heard someone's voice. The door opened and the president of the separatist territory of Kokoiti looked into the car. Well, American journalists filmed the blitzkrieg of the Georgian army? Now heal. I remembered for a long time where I saw the expression of the eyes that Kokoiti had then I remembered, that guy with a machine gun, whose bullets pierced the hearts of Sasha and Gigi, looked at us in the same way. At night, we were already in Vladikavkaz. Third day of the war. Peacekeeper headquarters. The Ossetian defense was practically broken on the very first day of the war. On the way of the tank columns stood at most 1,500 militiamen. Of the weapons they had only grenade launchers with outdated single shots. And the Russian peacekeeping battalion was locked in its barracks in the suburbs of Skinvalley. The locals called the area Shanghai. The battalion had no communication with the peacekeeping headquarters located in the city center. What was going on there, they did not really know at the headquarters. At that time, Georgian tanks were working at the barracks of the battalion point blank. The peacekeepers sat in the wound-up infantry fighting vehicles, but no orders were received from Moscow to return fire. Yes, and could not do. At night the communication center was bombed. The crews were on fire in their armored vehicles without firing a single return shot. The rest of the soldiers took cover from shelling in the cellars of the barracks. Any attempts to get out of there were stopped by dense sniper fire. 2 days later, the commander of the peacekeepers, General Kulakmetov, gave the official casualty figure: 18 people were killed and 1,500 wounded. Hearing this, the officers subordinate to him lowered their eyes. We have lost a lot more. Unofficial figures were different, from 100 to 200 people. 1058. 10. 23 o'clock. 23 o'clock. 2008. 58. 19. 58. 9. 19. 58. 1990? However, Israeli aid to Georgia was carefully camouflaged. She was not supposed to spoil relations between Moscow and Tel Aviv. This relationship today resembles a honeymoon. While Israeli military experts were preparing Georgia for war, Russian diplomats were preparing an agreement on visa-free entry to Israel. Therefore, Israeli military advisors did not act openly, but under the roof of private companies. Through them, military cargo was sent to Tbilisi. Moreover, the supply of Israeli weapons to Georgia was not suspended even at a time when hostilities were already in full swing. Third day of the war. Skin Valley. For the first 2 days, no one would have undertaken to predict the outcome of the war. The Georgians won air battles, artillery duels too. Their logistics also clearly surpassed the Russian one. The 58th Army was stuck 10 kilometers from Dija, and near Skin Valley. Only Chechen special forces from the Vostok Battalion fought near Skin Valley, and a battalion of Russian paratroopers that came to their aid. In the peacekeeping headquarters they were called BTG, Battalion Tactical Group. BTG soaked Georgian artillerymen. They dug in the mountains surrounding Skin Valley and did not allow the Russian columns to approach the city, keeping them at a respectful distance. On the night from the 8th to the 9th, the BTG went behind their lines and on the next day staged a uniform massacre on the positions. The commander of the Vostok, Sulim Yamadayev, said, "We deliberately gave leaks on the air, let the Georgians know that we came. They were afraid of us and sometimes retreated immediately, without a fight. Still, the Chechens have a certain reputation." Yamadayev breaks into a good-natured smile of a well-fed cannibal. That night, his fighters worked so hard in the mountains that in the morning the Tsar Road was completely unblocked. On it, in the early morning, units of the 58th Army were able to enter Chinval. And then everything was already a matter of technology. Within a few hours, the balance of power changed in the most drastic way. Georgian military formations were cut into 2 parts. Infantry brigades, tested in Iraq, were surrounded and blockaded in the area of Georgian villages, stretching along the Transcaucasian Highway. The most combat-ready units could no longer take part in the battles. And only poorly trained reservists remained on the front lines. They could not stand the confrontation with the Russian army and fled. Skin Valley streets were filled with heavy Russian armored vehicles. A sweep of the remaining snipers and fire spotters in the city began. From the mountains came the sound of battle. By evening, cheerful officers from the press service of the Ministry of Defense with colonel stars on their shoulders pulled themselves up. Now they helped the TV people compose the news. The city is taken under control by parts of the Russian army. And only now it is necessary to assess the scale of losses among the civilian population who survived. A strong word is required here. Assault. Yes. Storm. Surviving the storm of the city. Georgian special forces are currently blocked high in the mountains near the village of Tamaroshini. The TV people diligently wrote to the dictation of the military and immediately went on the air, repeating after them word for word. By evening, the city was really safe. The main sign of this security was the staff generals in iron trousers with stripes and giant caps. Now they calmly walked among the camouflaged military people. So there was really nothing to be afraid of. Late at night, the ubiquitous Vostok Battalion descended from the mountains in Skin Valley. It was his forces that actually blocked the Georgian special forces in the mountains. 2 dead Georgian officers lay on the armor of the captured Batir. In fact, it was believed that the commander of the battalion, Sulim Yamadayev, was on the federal wanted list. However, not hiding at all, he willingly explained. "They shot these people and took them with them. In case we get killed. Then we switch bodies." The Yamadayites treated the Georgian special forces gently. They let them go. They seemed to have taken hostages. They demanded an exit corridor. Well, we argued a little. Some thought that they were not hostages at all, but they themselves had changed into civilian clothes. But then they decided, what if? They gave them a corridor away from sin. Yamadayev, Akimbo, tells reporters how it really was. He smiles and distributes cigarettes that are in short supply in Skin Valley. On his chest is an iconostasis made of order blocks and the star of the hero of Russia. He is clearly pleased. It was his fighters who played a key role in the defense of Tskinvali and then cleared the passage for the 58th Army. He gladly demonstrates the watch donated by Putin and the nominal award, Makarov. Journalists are interested not so much in adventures in the mountains as in the intricacies of his relationship with Chechen President Ramzan Kadyrov. Sulim, how did you end up here? You should be arrested, you're wanted. Yamadayev is angry, but he keeps his mark. He laughs in response. Which one to arrest? I'm not hiding from anyone. Everyone understands that Kadyrov shushed his pocket prosecutors, and they, like me, put me on the wanted list. And I was in the hospital in Moscow until August 8th, and everyone knew where I was. If they thought it necessary, they would come and detain me. But they came to me and said, Sulim, the war has begun. Go fight for Russia. And I came. Listen, Sulim, what are you going to do tomorrow? I'm interested. Tomorrow we have a special operation. Yamadayev smiles with mock bloodthirstiness. We are going. Turning his head around, Vakhtang is not around. We are going to fuck the Georgians. Vakhtang is Georgian, but serves in the Chechen East. The Chechens changed his name in their own way, Varka. There are also a couple of Georgians among the Yamadayevs. The commander himself speaks of them with pride. We're international here. For him, their presence, as it were, removes the ethnic flavor of this war. He seems to be no longer leading his Chechen eagles to the Georgian. He is only following orders because he is the commander of the Russian special forces and soldiers of various nationalities serve under him. Almost like in Soviet times, Vakhtang Sulima supports. There are no bad nations, right, Commander? Who is an asshole, we fuck him. Much later, he even spoke a little to me. In the army since 1987. Then he entered the Institute of Military Translators in Moscow and has not changed his oath since then. That's why I'm here, not on the other side. Yakon he graduated as an Arabist. But in this case, his native language came in handy. In the battalion, Vakhtang took over the functions of an interpreter. He is a classic dude, mixed with spare clips from Stechkin. His duffel bag contains fresh t-shirts, socks, deodorant. He wears a well-fitted NATO camouflage, and the same NATO unloading, sitting on him like a glove. On the hands are branded leather fingerless gloves. Apparently, in the dashing 90s, he had plenty of mercenaries in Africa. But when work appears for me at home, I am always a Russian officer. He chuckles. For all his foppishness, Vakhtang is an unconditional brave scumbag. It seemed to me that since he was for the translator, then his place was at the headquarters. It turned out not. The interpreter, as they explained to me, should go at the very edge of the assault group. There he will be able to quickly interrogate those taken prisoner. On the edge of the assault group, VK Tang went with the same show-offs with which he did everything else, with deliberate laziness saying, "If only not uphill. I have both legs sewn on. 4th day of the war. Morning. Tskinvali." For many journalists, the Chechens were the only way to get to the front line after August 10th. Ordinary army officers, hearing about the desire to go south with their unit, looked at you like you were crazy. Fuck you, you should go, not to Georgia. They could send politely. I'll take it only if there is a command from above. 11-693. 25. After sustaining a theatrical pause, the battalion commander added, "Although what is she, to hell with Georgian. The missile came from Gori, and the Georgians have been bombed for 2 days already. They have nowhere to take off." One of his fighters sighed theatrically and summed up politically correct. Well, if so, then it's a pity for Sushka. It turned out unnatural and therefore funny. The fighters of the East are 100% people of war. It has long become an independent value for them. These people were sincerely carried away by the beauty of the battle, when, with their heads up, they watched aerial pirouettes, but the patriotic sentiments of the Vostokovites were not touched. Too much and too habitually they killed others and died themselves. The column passed to the Georgian border without encountering resistance. The reservists fled. The only serious battle was in the border village called either Kvimokriti or Semo-Nikosi. The tanks of the 693rd Regiment climbed through the village without reconnaissance, ran into oncoming fire and lost 2 vehicles along with their crews. The tanks rolled back to the outskirts. Columns of black smoke rose above the village. 9 people from the landing party immediately laid down somewhere nearby. And without reconnaissance, they poked their nose into the village only because no one understood. South Ossetia ended long ago and the column is already moving through Georgia. The intelligent commander of the Vadenskaya Company, Cuba, commented on the situation with an anecdote from the category of decent ones. 2 grandmothers sit on the mound and gossip. Look, Nikitina, there the generals are coming. Oh, yes, they have cards in their hands. Well, then they will now ask to show where they are. Let's go help the army. I still do not know exactly what the village was called, where, forcing the Georgians to peace, so many of our soldiers were killed. You understand, a Chechen commando told me a month later, already in Moscow. The command to cross the Georgian border had not yet been received at that time. It turned out that the column went without a team, and then there were losses. Therefore, they reported upstairs that we were stuck in the village of Kvimokviti. It's just that it stands on the very border, and the village of Semonikosi, in which we actually ended up, is located 6 kilometers further inland into the territory of Georgia. However, who at all then was interested in the name of this village? Since it didn't work out right away, now someone had to take care of this village not immediately. Who will be sent? Is that what everyone was interested in? Vostok was sent ahead. Their breakthrough attempt looked like footage from an American blockbuster. The fighters moved deep into the village in short dashes, covering each other. Suddenly, from the Georgian side, from the slopes of the mountains, the shelling of the streets began. They thrashed just where the Yamadevites made their way. Direct fire from heavy 152mm self-propelled howitzers. Then 120mm mortars joined in, and somewhere in the village itself, the Shilka launched. The shells lay side by side, 30 to 50 meters to the right or to the left. The Chechens did not stop anyway. Purley forward, as if spellbound from death. Another volley roared on the slopes. The soldiers counted to 5, and at the count of 5 they threw themselves on the ground, trying to guess so that the side was covered by the stone wall of the house. Just at that moment, the projectile flew. Explosion. The whistle of fragments piercing board fences. A hail of rubble falling from above. Another team, forward. Everyone gets up and, covering each other, move further along the street. Until a new salvo hoots from the slope. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The commandos count on the run and everything repeats again. The shells are getting closer. I lean against the wall between the windows. Bark, the glass is crumbling at my feet. Georgian speech is heard from broken windows. Soldiers? I regretted that I had a camera in my hands, and not a Kalashnikov. I shrink in anticipation of a cue from the window. Who the hell brought me to these galleys? No, women's voices. I unclench. Crossroad ahead. I suddenly feel a poke in my side. I turn around. Faktang, you son of a bitch. With an inappropriate foppish melancholy half-smile, he draws. Run, bro. This is where everything gets shot. 30. 7. 693. 29142. The battalion commander, Sulim Yamadev, was a tough field commander 10 years ago. He was considered the youngest brigadier general in independent Ikaria, had bad relations with the Wahhabi, Basayev and patronized the traditional Sufi Ahmed Kadyrov. In those years, the current president of Chechnya, Kadyrov Jr., considered it an honor to be photographed next to Yamadev. Sulim's nephew showed me one such photo on his mobile phone. The future battalion commander imposingly collapsed in the car and looked out of the lowered window. The red-haired young man, the future Chechen president, modestly settled down next to the car door. Then Yamadev became a Russian officer and a hero of Russia. And the Kadyrovs head the Chechen Republic, a subject of the Russian Federation, in shifts. And now Yamadev is in a tough confrontation with Chechen President Ramzan Kadyrov. The cause of the conflict is considered to be Kadyrov's policy. All law enforcement agencies in Chechnya should be personally controlled by the president. First, Kadyrov created from his supporters the local police and 2 police regiments, north and south. Then he began to gradually eliminate alternative centers of power. He began with the so-called Oil Regiment, the Highlander Special Detachment, which specialized in the protection of oil fields and pipelines. Highlander was not subordinate to the Republican authorities, but to the FSB Directorate for the North Caucasus. Kadyrov managed to achieve a decision that the regiment would be disbanded. And the former commander of Highlander, Movladi Basarov, was shot dead by Chechen policemen right in Moscow. They explained that they had opened a criminal case against him and wanted to interrogate him, but he began to resist. After that, only 2 battalions not controlled by the president remained in Chechnya, West and East. With the commander of the West, the one-eyed Sedmagomd Kakiev, Kadyrov had a long conflict. Unlike the vast majority of current Chechen politicians, Kakiev is not a former militant. He is a Zavgevite, that is, even in the First Chechen War, Kakiev fought not for the secession of Chechnya, but for the integrity of the Russian Empire. In that war, he lost an eye, an arm, and, finally, his homeland, since everything ended with the Kasavyurt peace, that is, the victory of the separatists. The end of the 1990s, he whiled away in Moscow in a black way drinking at the Rossiya Hotel. On the Second Chechen War, he won back his homeland, they made him a glass eye, and an iron hand. One problem, yesterday's militants have become ardent patriots of Russia and noteworthy statesmen. They traveled around Kharkiv on a crooked goat. Disagreements with Kadyrov Jr. ended with the departure of the commander of the West from his post. The pill was sweetened, he became the Deputy Military Commissar of Chechnya for Military Patriotic Education. And instead of Kharkiv, Beslan Elikhanov, Kadyrov's protégé, was appointed to command the West. So the Vostok Battalion remained the last of the force resources outside the control of Kadyrov inside the Republic. And since the spring of 2008, the president of Chechnya has taken it seriously. Already after the Ossetian campaign in the battalion, I was shown a report on the situation around the Vostok. I learned the story of how Ramzan Akhmadovich and Sulimbek Mirzovich quarreled in detail. The president and the battalion commander became enemies due to an accident. On April 13, 2008, Warrant Officer Eldarov and Senior Sergeant Misultanov, serving in the Vostok Battalion, were returning from the place of the special operation. A Toyota Camry crashed into their Zhiguli car. Eldarov and Misultanov died. The Zhigul was driving 50 km an hour and the Toyota 190. But a relative of the Chechen president was driving it. In connection with the latter circumstance, difficulties arose in establishing the culprit. The next day, the dead in the accident were buried, and the funeral cortege of Yamadayev met with Kadyrov's escort vehicles for a long time and could not figure out which one of them should give way in such a situation. They found out with shooting in the air. Didn't find out. 3 hours later, the barracks of the Vostok Battalion were blocked by units of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of the Chechen Republic. The Kadyrovites began to catch and arrest Yamadayevites throughout Gudermes. 142 servicemen of the Vostok Battalion fell under distribution that day. Furthermore, using the methods of carrot and stick, the Kadyrovites managed to ensure that from April to August more than 150 fighters left the battalion. It's about a third. The battalion commander himself was put on the wanted list by the prosecutor's office of Chechnya. He was accused of murdering Azman Batsev, a rich baker kidnapped back in 1998. Most likely, the future commander of the Vostok really had something to do with that disappearance, but the Chechen prosecutor's office forgot that in the early 2000s Yamadayev was amnested, considering his transfer to the Russian side a worthy price for the forgiveness of past sins. 2008. Andrei is 34 years old. In combat he works in tandem with the Chechen Ayub. The first call sign is blockade, the second is Goro. Blockade because, firstly, he comes from St. Petersburg, and secondly, because he is very skinny, about himself says. A year in the battalion. Before that, he did not serve in the Russian army. Andrew is a man without a past. One can only guess what happened earlier in the life of this man. Prison? Foreign Legion? A multi-year spy mission? He still considers himself a military man conditionally. At the same time, he is a 100% man-war. Andrei raised the cult of battle for himself to the rank of religion. In June, I went to Samarkand, spent the night at the grave of Tamerlane. Not where tourists are taken, but down below, in the dungeon, where he really lies. The Uzbeks believe that whoever sits there all night will get a piece of Lane Timur's military luck. It seems to be nothing special, but for some reason people do not sit there. The caretaker said that I was only the third one who stayed until the morning. I also grabbed a small fragment of a tombstone from there. Here it is, sewn up here. Andrei pulls out a tiny pouch from his bosom and shows his personal storage of the Koshchev needle. Are you, Snow? What about me? Well, you also seem to be as cool as a boiled egg. Golos, on whose graves did he gain military happiness? No, I'm not cool, Snow neighs. As a child, I was a fat boy from a professorial family. Until the 6th grade, I couldn't pull myself up on the horizontal bar at all. And he got into the special forces by accident. He just mixed up the doors. The three of us lie in the dark on the cooling ground. We stare at the black sky, starless because of the haze. And I ask the guys how it happens that one fine day a person ends up in no one knows where, no one knows why, and lies among the hills of Georgia. He is resting from the fact that he has been killing people for whom there is no enmity, no hatred, and nothing personal at all, and soon he will lie among other hills, or plains, and rest from the same. The universal formula of a military Superman does not add up. Well, you yourself are a journalist. What the hell are you doing here? So my profession is to be here. And we have a profession to be here. Together with the blockade in the Vostok is his fellow countryman Sasha. The third St. Petersburg itself is Snow. They jokingly call themselves the Leningrad Trio. The trio entered Zemonikosi as part of the first group of Yamadayevs. Here is the Georgian Vakhtang, all the other Chechens. Yamadayev is also here. Probably, in childhood he did not watch the film, Chapiv, and now does not know where the commander should be. He went straight to the assault with the star of the hero and order blocks on his chest. But Makarov still left the nominal award, having filtered with a characteristic Chechen stretch. Tuko pistol. It will be a pity if they kill me and the Georgians get it. This international brigade was the last to leave the village. Behind them, they brought out a column of Russian tanks stuck on the outskirts of the village under heavy fire from Georgian self-propelled guns. There were about a dozen cars and about 50 conscripts. 4th day of the war. Evening. Outskirts of Zemonikosi village. In addition to temporary duties as an interpreter, Vakhtang was also the commander of a separate group. Among his subordinates was another Georgian, Dato. Young, smart, polite. He addressed me exclusively on you. A 10-year age difference made me definitely older, who, of course, cannot be poked, cannot be interrupted, you must skip forward, and stuff like that. Next to the Chechens, who generally do not understand well why one interlocutor should be addressed as if there were many of them, Dato, with his good manners, looked funny. Dato, what's with your unloading? What did you put in there? You see, I take 18 horns with me. Twice as much as it should. Why? Well, I'm Georgian. So what? Do you know what happens when you run out of ammo? What? Captivity. Can you imagine what will happen to me if I, a Georgian, find myself in captivity of the Georgians? All this Dato blurts out to me in decent Russian, but with Mingrelian speed. It can be understood only with a strong desire. However, I understand him not so much by ear as by gut. I am also afraid of Georgian captivity. Although, on the other hand, I am sure that my journalistic background, with the magic American word, Newsweek, which harms me more here, will work for me there. Unlike Dato, who would turn out to be not only an enemy but also a traitor in captivity, I can sort of impersonate a representative of the Allied side. Captivity is really a special thing. He is more afraid of death. Being captured is considered worse than having your legs blown off. Why this irrational fear? Maybe from the time of the terrible Stalinist order, do not surrender alive. Maybe from the post-war period behind the Gulag thorn that replaced the thorn of concentration camps without a pause. Or maybe even since the time of Thermopylae, when the ancient Greeks lowered 20,000 ancient Persians who surrendered to the mercy of the winner. Any soldier considers captivity the worst of evils, but only as long as it is about himself. As soon as it concerns the enemy, the same fighter is sure that taking prisoner is an act of humanism. Simply because the alternative is execution on the spot. Thank God, the fighters with whom I happen to meet, this cup has passed. But they themselves took Georgian soldiers prisoner in front of my eyes. Captivity in a combat situation is a blow to the face with a butt, and a dozen heavy kicks followed. Checkmate, shouting, bastard. Scum. shot at us, and then the question was asked in an unexpectedly calm and even everyday voice. Where else are there Georgians nearby? Speak, or, you understand. Do you have children? Who will feed them if you decide to play silent with us? This is exactly what happened to Tomas Gulashvili, a reservist who covered the fire spotter in the village of Semonikosi. If he had been caught with him, he would have been shot without talking. But Tomas at some point got scared, ran away, changed into civilian clothes, and after that he ran into Chechens on the street. I gave him a military badge, which Tomas, in a panic, forgot to remove from his neck. He was interrogated both in Georgian and in Russian in turn by Vaktang and Sneg. The prisoner understood both languages equally badly, because he was drunk. I hear a snippet of a conversation. Let's bring him down. We continue to break through. Do not drag with us. Yes, they interrogated. It's dishonest to finish him now. In the end, Tomas was tied up with bandages from the first aid kit and pulled out of the fight. At the same time, carefully watching that he would not be hooked. Soon another reservist joined him. Later, I learned that philanthropy was shown contrary to the order from above, do not take prisoners. Soon it was cancelled. They realized that sooner or later they would have to exchange their own, for example, the same down pilots. But at that moment, the Yamadavites did not know about this yet. By the way, the prisoners, as soon as they were taken out of the battle, were untied and given water to drink. The Georgians greedily swallowed the turbid water drawn from the stream into a 2-liter plastic bottle. A young Chechen guy grumbled without malice. He shoots at me, and I bring him water. Then both were led to the same stream to wash. An Ossetian tanker who was passing by, having learned that Georgian soldiers had been captured, jumped up and hit Tomas, who was sitting on the ground, in the face with his boot. The face of the prisoner, already cut by the butt of the butt during the capture, again filled with blood. The Chechens drove the Ossetians away. What are you? We don't take prisoners. Tomas was sent away from Sin in the back of a car. Sit down, be sober. The commander of the Kirchiloev company Samradi, catching my astonished glance, grinned wryly. This humanism is correct. There, in battle, it doesn't count. It is not clear whether he was joking with me or seriously said. Whatever the case, I ended up winning anyway. When these two were captured, I had to drive away the annoying thought that I would have to witness how the Chechens cut their throats. 5th day of the war. Morning. Road to Gori. The captured reservists were given a sleeping bag for the night. True, 1 for 2, but this meant that among the Chechens there was a kind man who lost his to the Georgians. Spare sleeping bags, in such a case, of course, were not taken. By morning, the prisoners, having recovered from the shock, were already sitting by the fire together with the Chechens, and on a common basis, together with them, they ate stew from a jar passed around. If it were not for the abrasions on their physiognomies from the side, one would have thought that these were shepherds who looked into the light. The soft attitude of the Chechen special forces towards the enemy was strikingly different from the atmosphere prevailing among the Ossetian militias. Neither the Chechens nor the Russians from the motorized rifle regiment of the captured Georgian soldiers were given to the Ossetians. Why do you need them? We will change to our own. You're lying, you're torturing them. Well, don't let them go just like that. We won't let you. The commander of the 693rd Regiment, Colonel Andrei Kazachenko, suddenly broke loose and yelled with a threat. You won't let me, you say? Yes, I personally released 6 reservists just like that. So what? The Vostokovites did not release their prisoners, but with the very first board they sent them to the intelligence headquarters of the 58th Army. Yamadayev still had to have a thorough fight with Vaktang on this occasion. Why the hell are we sending them there? They are just peasants. What do they know? The Georgian snarled through gritted teeth. Peasants, you say? Sulin yelled in response, and the tokens? Is there a lemon in your pocket? Think tokens. They just got called. Didn't even get to cut it. Vaktang argued. In the end, the officers looked offendedly at each other. By noon, a nasty rumor appeared. One of the Russian paratroopers said that the prisoners were not taken, well, like, the guys from the reconnaissance company dropped them from a helicopter. It's bad, of course, but on that day the Georgians scolded them to hell in the 200s. Sitting in the headquarters Barguzin, I gloomily stared at the back of Yamadayev's head, and persuaded myself, such bloodthirsty tales always walk in war. It's such a neurosis. People turn themselves on to suppress their own fear. Persuasion was bad. The short crop back of Yamadayev's head was indifferent, and it was impossible to understand from it what he himself thought about all this. The psychotherapy session ended with a mournful chord. "Oh, Sulim. It would be better if you listened to Vakhtang," I thought, not risking, however, saying this aloud. The first post-war night. Outskirts of Gori. The next prisoner was caught by the Chechens already deep in Georgia near Gori on the night from the 12th to the 13th. It was no longer a reservist, but a real contract soldier. "I'm from Poti. I enlisted a few months ago, for 500 lari per month, approximately €250. Thin, wiry, and surprisingly very strong. There is a slight bruise on the right shoulder from the butt, which means that he participated in the battles. The guy was taken when he was sneaking past the Chechens who were camping. He claimed to be behind his own. I have not yet heard about the fact that a few hours ago the end of the military operation was announced. Naturally, the Chechens suspected him of being a saboteur. But, no matter how much they interrogated him, he stood his ground, and only asked, 'I beg you. Don't cut off your head.' Why he was so afraid of this particular death, and why it is worse, for example, no one understood a bullet in the back of the head. But they decided to use his fear. The guy was taken behind the car, put a knife to his throat. I beg, I beg, I beg. Still, it was not possible to get clear answers from him. Listen, if you left the encirclement, then why didn't you take off your NATO uniform? Why didn't you change into civilian clothes? Yes, I wanted to, but I found only a red sweatshirt. And I'm sick of wearing red. So you're still a thug. Vakhtang laughed, something a lot. I see, you have a black suit in your army. Turned around and explained. In the afternoon they took a trophy jeep. There is a cassette in the tape recorder, and on it in a variety of versions, thieves share, in Russian, and in Georgian, and quickly, and slowly, and in the Azerbaijani manner. In the morning, the right kid in camouflage managed to break the thin nylon cord that tied his hands behind his back and tried to run away. He got caught again. What should Sulim do with him? Yamadayev shrugged his shoulders. The war seems to be over. He turned away and left, leaving the final decision to Vakhtang. The bolt clanged, driving the cartridge into the Kalashnikov's barrel. The Georgian was taken to a ravine behind an orchard, where the Yamadayevs camped for a bivouac. He was ordered to hold his hands behind his head, and on his wrists a thin deep blue furrow was visible, left by a torn nylon cord. At the bottom of the ravine, he himself stopped and said for the last time, "I beg you, don't cut your head. Go home, to Poti," a hefty Chechen escort muttered in response. The guy didn't move. He continued to stand stock still, hands clasped behind his head. Vakhtang translated into Georgian. Without waiting for his reaction, the Yamadayev men threw their machine guns behind their backs and slowly walked back up the slope of the ravine. Yamadayev himself took an interest in the fate of the prisoner only 2 hours later. "Well, what are you, huh?" This was followed by an eloquent slashing gesture with the palm of his hand. "No, Sulim. It seems like the fighters began to make excuses. You yourself said that there is no more war." Later in Moscow, a month and a half after the war, Vakhtang explained to me. For good, the guy could have been spent. The guy was not a shabby collective farmer, but a very specific mercenary. But I liked him. I myself grew up in an old Tbilisi courtyard, where in those years such Kentus ruled. And then he did not lie about getting out of the encirclement. Such nonsense about a red sportswear, you can't imagine it on purpose. During the 5 days of the war, I heard a lot about the terrible fate of the prisoners. The Ossetians spoke about the monstrous ferocity of the Georgians, severed heads, raped women, shot children. The Yamadayevites, by the way, did not believe in Georgian cruelty and claimed that there were only individual excesses, and even those were connected not with the Georgians, but with the Ukrainian mercenaries who fought on the side of Saakashvili. My Georgian friends, whom I called daily in Tbilisi, also laughed at these stories. Nonsense. Ours don't do that. But they, in turn, demanded from me an eyewitness account of the Chechen atrocities. I didn't see the atrocities. About 5 years ago, an elderly general from the Gorosh, who in the 1980s commanded a regiment in Afghanistan, not ours, but the Afghan People's Democratic Army, frankly explained to me what express interrogation in combat conditions is. If there is not much time, you just gout out his eye before the first question. And then he spreads everything. Because after that he thinks only about how to save the second one. Chechens did not gout out their eyes during the battle. The prisoners, of course, were beaten, but not by mortal combat. And during interrogations after the battle, they no longer beat me, but only intimidated. There was no talk of any humiliation at all. Speaking in the language of Western human rights activists, I have not seen examples of excessive use of force and excessive psychological pressure. And these are Yamadivites who have a bad reputation. Of course, I heard a lot about their terrible cruelties towards the Wahhabis caught in Chechnya. And even, I tend to believe that all this is true. But they treated the Georgians differently. They say that Chechen captivity and Ossetian captivity are two big differences. They say that the Ossetians really mocked the Georgians who fell into their hands. I don't know, I didn't see it. In general, I can say about captivity that it is not as terrible as it is painted. And I can also say that my personal fear of captivity did not weaken at all from this confidence. The last night of the war, the outskirts of the village of Semonikosi. The night after the only battle in Georgia, the Yamadayevs spent an open field on the outskirts of the village. They sent the wounded by helicopter to Java, where a temporary field hospital had already been set up, and they laughed languidly until dawn. If it were a Chechen village, we would not have survived until morning. The locals would have slaughtered everyone. But the village is Georgian, sleep well. In the early morning the alarm arose. The tanks are coming. Prepare for battle. The tanks turned out to be Russian. It turned out that the deputy commander of the tank battalion of the 693rd Regiment, Captain Vadim Baranov, got lost in the dark, stuck to the Georgian column, which he mistook for his own, and walked several kilometers in its composition. It was not difficult to confuse the Soviet T-72 here and there in the dark. For 2 hours Baranov advanced in the ranks of the retreating enemy army. The Georgians also took him for their own. In the end, the senior column decided to find out what kind of tanks were nailed to them. Seeing an officer in NATO camouflage walking towards him, Baranov finally understood who his fellow travelers were. He gave the command to point the gun at the nearest tank, leaned out of the hatch with a machine gun, and took aim at the Georgian officer. This Georgian saw me and also understood everything. I got down on my knees, put the machine gun on the ground, and made the sign of the cross. And I think, I will have time to make one volley, and then, in 10 minutes, I will become a hero of Russia. Posthumously. So I say to this colonel, listen, Genetsvale, you go to the right, I go to the left, and we did not see each other. 5th day of the war. Last. Vicinities of Gori. In the morning we moved to the Georgian city of Gori. We went out to him after dinner, and did not meet resistance. Along the way, they began to discuss who had what Georgians as friends. I tell Company Commander Samradi that back in the 1980s he served in Western Ukraine together with a great guy named Gia. He was older than the call, but he never smacked me. He's from Gori. Maybe we'll meet. Maybe, the Chechen agrees, he, like you, is 40-odd, he must have been drafted into the reservists. You see, we will have to clean it up. What are we to do with your Gia if we take him prisoner? Like what? Let's say hello, hug, talk about the army. We will feed him, give him a drink and send him towards Tbilisi. He's my army friend, don't fuck yourself. He just shot at us. Maybe even killed someone. Do we give him tea? Samradi vividly imagined the situation. And what do you suggest? Well, at least we'll give him a punch in the face. I'm sorry brother, but your friend will rake at the most, do not indulge. Then, of course, we will let go, army friendship is holy, and you raise your hand against my friend. Samradi breaks into a smile. Well, so be it, let's let your Gia go without cunts. But still we won't give tea. I already have all the bags of Lipton out. There were no Georgian troops in Gori itself either. The Georgian army was no longer just retreating, it fled in panic. Along the way, the Yamadavites collected a fair collection of abandoned captured equipment. Snow rolled on a handsome Land Rover. Not on a varnished Playboy, one of those that plow the Moscow asphalt, but on a real African legend, a dirty grey military jeep with a spare tire on the hood. Look, the tank is 3/4 full. Enough to Tbilisi. Together with Samradi and his fighters from the Kerchaloy Company, we set off to take an inventory of military depots. Locks are knocked down from Makarov. American steel stubbornly resists Russian bullets, and Samradi shot the entire clip. In this hangar there are only mountains of military gear, mostly worn. The guys probably than God sent. I picked up a pair of brand new NATO boots instead of almost falling apart Chinese sneakers. The boots turned out to be too small, so I threw them away. Subsequently, the Georgian press accused the Chechens of robberies, although in fact that warehouse was their only feat in this regard, seriously robbed by others. The next day, incomprehensible reconnaissance battalions appeared, related to who knows what parts. They entered the city, hung out there for several hours, left the city. They themselves started a rumor that they went to take the archive of the Gori branch of the Georgian State Security Ministry. True, later the military prosecutor's office spent a long time and unsuccessfully figuring out who walked around bank offices that day, opened ATMs and took with them more than $6 million. Our column did not enter the city at all. We got up 3 kilometers from the city, helicopters flew in to pick up 200s, the crews of tanks burned either in Kvimokviti or in Semonikosi. A cargo helicopter escorted by a combat helicopter. Yamadev carefully suggests to journalists. You can return with this opportunity. What are you going to do next? We are waiting for the command to storm Gori, and if I stay for the assault, then I can return on something, of course expensive. There will be an assault, there will be new 200 THS. A turntable will fly behind them again, somehow you will return. Helicopters take off. I stay to watch how they take the city. No sooner had the noise of the propeller subsided than the news came that the Russian president had given the command to stop the military operation. War is over. Here you go. Since there is no assault, there will be no dead. And, consequently, the helicopter. There seems to be a risk of getting stuck here. A minute later, these cynical and pragmatic reflections were interrupted by the appearance of the adjutant of the commander of the 693rd Regiment, Andrei Kazachenko was called to headquarters. Comrade Colonel, don't give us a lift at Skinvali. No problem. You have 15 minutes to say goodbye to the guys while I wash and change. He washed for 40 minutes. Then he cursed at his chief of staff for a long time, not on business, but simply because he sat on his stool while he was preparing maps for a report at headquarters. He swore relish and loudly, albeit in half a joke. To imagine that Yamadaev spoke to any of his fighters in such a manner was completely unthinkable. I immediately remembered the thoughts of Snow about how the East differs from the normal part. I caught myself thinking that in these 2 days I had lost the habit of my native army, although I once got used to it for 2 whole years. But Kazachenko is a nice person and his regiment is clearly one of the best. The colonel also included 1 BMP from Vostok in his combat guard. So I got hooked on the armor to my own. Mentally, I called the Yamadevites that way. You get used to good things quickly. Burnt was flying at me from the exhaust pipe. Droplets of black oil settled on the face and clothes. And all the same, I did not regret that I refused a place in the headquarters armored Ural. On the way back we went through the so-called Georgian enclaves, the villages of South Ossetia populated by ethnic Georgians. The civilian population left here in full force. The villages were set on fire by the Ossetian militias. The Chechens looked at this, shaking their heads disapprovingly. Unlike the Ossetians, they did not hold grudges against the Georgians. This is a bad war. Consider fighting with your own, with the former Soviet. We parted near the headquarters of the peacekeepers in Chinvli. I jumped off the armor on the move, waved my hand. Salamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. No hugs, no phone exchanges, no promises to meet. I didn't even know the names of most of these guys. 2 flaming days passed, filled with the smell of gunpowder, blood, a sense of the proximity of death and the proximity of ours, who, if anything, will not surrender. The military fairy tale ended at the moment when the Chechen BMP, smoking and rattling its caterpillars on the asphalt, flew to the crossroads, turned and disappeared from my eyes. I went to the headquarters, where I left my backpack in the kitchen closet. Leaving Skinvali, I took nothing with me except a camera. I found the backpack turned upside down, nothing was missing, but things were turned out on the floor, the captain explained guiltily. A colonel from Vladikavkaz arrived yesterday. At night he got drunk like a pig, he wanted to catch up. I pinned myself here and let's rummage through the backpacks of journalists. I was looking for booze. I packed my things, took a cold shower, put on fresh underwear and went to look for the visiting colonel. Adrenaline, which had been circulating in my blood for the past 2 days, convinced me that the most appropriate thing would be to knock out the peacekeeper's teeth. I did not find the colonel at the headquarters, fortunately for him. Yes, and probably for yourself too. First day after the war. Vladikavkaz. The next morning I was already in Vladikavkaz. There were no tickets to Moscow for the next 2 days. I went to look for a hotel. I traveled around from 5 hotels and in each received the same type of answer: there are no places. Another woman at the next reception sympathetically said that since such a hopeless situation, they can lay me on a trestle bed in the back room, maybe some room will be free tomorrow. I felt like a Mr. Twister in Soviet Leningrad. Maybe you can tell me some hotel. You know what's in your city, don't you? Call, suddenly, where there is an unoccupied room. Try Golden Crown. There are certainly empty seats. At the same time, her face became distant and unpleasant. I realized that something was wrong with the Crown. When we arrived, it turned out that this was not a hotel, but a restaurant. I figured out for a long time whether the taxi driver mixed up something. Maybe there is another Golden Crown? He assured me that there was only one Crown in their city. In desperation, I found the head waiter. This is some kind of misunderstanding. I came from the war, from South Ossetia. My plane doesn't leave until 2 days later, and I can't find a hotel room. And for some reason I was sent to you. A tall Ossetian in a tuxedo and with a tattoo on his fingers nodded understandingly. We have a sauna at the restaurant. And the sauna has apartments. True, they are paid by the hour. They will run up in a day like for a suite at the Hilton. But since this is the situation, since a person is traveling from the war, we will give you one number at a discount. I spent the next 2 days in a brothel. A huge room, a round bed with a diameter of 3 meters, a sofa and a couple of armchairs upholstered in bright red leather. An elderly Ossetian, who was here for the maid, warned me each time with the same phrase. If you want to eat, call. We will bring from the restaurant directly to the room. And if you want anything else, don't hesitate to call. I haven't been able to find anything else. The war in South Ossetia is over, frontline people poured out. Men keenly desired to feel the fullness of life, with which they could playfully leave just recently. The sauna worked around the clock, the girls worked in the Stakhanov style and were employed in 3 shifts. Even at 6 in the morning, cars drove up here, and women's laughter could be heard from the corridor. Everyone celebrated the victory. Georgians too. Listening to the radio, I learned that Saakashvili managed to convince his country that the Russian tanks stationed on the outskirts of Gori are nothing compared to the political dividends that Georgia will be able to reap from this war. My flight Vladikavkaz, Moscow was half composed of fellow journalists. Most of them did not even reach Tskhinvali at all, but worked from Vladikavkaz, but the guys looked very brave. Many have strapped trophy NATO helmets made of bulletproof carbon fiber onto bright city backpacks. For one such pepper, chatting on a mobile phone, I stood in line. Hi dear. I'm glad to hear too. No, everything is calm here. Well, unless occasionally some sniper will shoot. The colleague turned around, saw my smirk and the camera around my neck, blushed and winked conspiratorially. Like, you understand, well, how else to glue the girl? During the 2 days spent in Vladikavkaz, I discovered that the girls glue everything around, and on a grand scale. Literally every person he met told how he fought in Tskhinvali as a volunteer from the first days, and that it was he who knocked out the very tank that was shown on all channels. On the plane, I leaned back in my seat, closed my eyes, opened them. I was terribly sleepy, despite the fact that for the last 2 days I've been sleeping almost non-stop on a huge round bed. Sleepily flipped through some newspaper given out for free by a flight attendant. It was in it that I first read the euphemism, forcing Georgia to peace. The photographs in the newspaper were all on a military theme. I saw all this not in black and white, but in color, moving, tangible. When all this could be touched, it was called war, and when the tanks and people lost their color, became flat and papery, this is already peace enforcement. I looked at the photo and fell into a dream and no longer understood where the newspaper was and where the memories were. The black and white images came to life and began to move. Who is that creeping along the fence? Damn bad print, you can't make out the faces. It seems that Barankovich is running towards a large, terribly rotating tank with a grenade launcher in his hands. Bark. Tank is on fire. The corpses of Georgians are not visible on the bad black and white print, but I know they are there. I saw them not as grey spots, but as bright anthracite firebrands. The colonel forced them to peace, persuaded them. And what's that? Some of the Yamadayevs almost point-blank thrust half a horn into a Georgian spotter. It is a pity not to make out who. And the Georgian fell on his side under a pear tree, forced into peace. This is what peace is. This is generally some kind of crap, only you can see the turntable in the air. They filmed it from afar. It seems like someone is falling from it. It looks like Tomas is being forced to peace, that reservist. Now it will fly to the ground and reconcile with everything. I fell deeper and deeper into a dream. Either the photo, or the memories disappeared somewhere. Only a childish counting rhyme remained in my mind. Peace, make peace, make peace. And don't fight anymore. The plane turned on the runway and prepared for takeoff. I heard the steady hum of its engines. I almost fell asleep and only these words remained knocking in my head. Make peace, make peace, make peace. And again. Make peace, make peace, make peace. Thank you for downloading the book in the free electronic library royalib.ru, http://royalib.ru. Leave a review about the book, http://royalib.ru/comment/dgemail_orhan/vyonika_pioti_dunny.html. All books by the author, http://royalib.ru/author/dgemail_orhan.html.